In today's video, I want to talk to you guys about a project that impacts our lives in so many ways. From our internet connection to mobile device uses, from tracking of flights to sharing of rides, and then looking at our energy consumption and tracking it. This is a project that I believe impacts all of us around the world. So I've been following PEAQ Network for a very long period of time now. In today's video, I want to lay out my thesis for why I believe they will be one of the best projects within the DePIN and RWA space. So if you're new around here, welcome. My name's Colin. What I do is I focus on projects that have great fundamentals that I believe will do extremely well. So if you like this type of content, please consider giving the video a like and consider subscribing, and I'll continue to bring you more content like this. Furthermore, none of this is financial advice. The crypto market is extremely risky and volatile, and most people lose their money. So I encourage everybody to do their own due diligence and research before they consider any project. Finally, none of this is sponsored content. All of these are my raw thoughts, my own research, and what I think about this project. And on my channel, I will always disclose if there's any sponsorship or if I have a position in any project. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So in order to fully understand the importance of the PEAQ Network project, we're going to take a look at a couple of things. Number one is review what is DePIN, RWA, and why are they important to us. Number two is taking a look at the PEAQ project itself. What is the technology and what are the solutions PEAQ is offering? Number three is looking at the actual projects that are building on PEAQ. We're finally going to take a look at the tokenomics, and then lastly, taking a look at the price and seeing where our best point of entry is for this project if we're considering it. So let's start here with the definition of DePIN. Now, I encourage everybody to go through this report by Masari. It's a 53-page report that goes through an extensive wealth amount of information. So DePIN stands for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Network. As you can see right over here, it affects every single critical area of our lives, from our communications to our wireless networks to our energy consumption, all types of different services that we use every single day. An easy way to think about DePIN is the ability to use blockchain technology in order to incentivize and create physical infrastructure networks that will help us live in a much more efficient manner. So in this report, Masari goes over a lot of good information. There's a lot of good research on the critical DePIN projects that are happening out there. They talk about the demand side to DePIN and then also the supply side to DePIN as well. So the report finishes off with a very nice summary of the different areas of the blockchain that DePIN is going to impact. And they also predict that this market will likely grow through a $3.5 trillion market. Here's a nice DePIN map that PEAQ put out themselves right over here. You can see all the physical resources combined with the digital resources. You got your wireless, geospatial mobility, your energy, health networks, agriculture networks. When you combine that with the digital resources with bandwidth, storage, and compute power, that is what they're aiming for. And I think this diagram summarizes it very well. At the core, those are your physical resource networks that you're trying to power, and then around it, that's your digital resources, and together, that's what makes up this DePIN circle. Now, in order for us to power these massive physical networks, like your mobile and cellular networks, your internet and computer use, tracking of flights, sharing of rides, all of those things requires a blockchain that can execute transactions really quickly, so a very high TPS and a low transaction cost, because it makes no sense to run it on something that is slow and expensive. So if you take a careful look under the hood at the fundamentals of PEAQ, you can see why it's well positioned to solve a lot of these DePIN issues. Look at the TPS. It's 100,000. So that's 100,000 transactions per second, a very high throughput in order for you to execute a large number of transactions. The cost per transaction is very low. It's only a 0.00025. So very cost efficient, comparable to that of Solana. And then it's very decentralized. It has a Nakamoto coefficient of 93, which means it's very decentralized and very resistant to attacks on its network. It also has a block time of 6 seconds right now, but they're aiming to scale this down to a 0.25 of a second. And running a node on PEAQ is going to be much cheaper and more affordable, therefore making it even much more decentralized. So the other major advantage for builders and developers is that PEAQ is EVM compatible with Rust smart contract. So for those developers who are already familiar with the Ethereum network and also Solana as well, they'll have no problem transferring their skills over to PEAQ. And then finally, PEAQ is building an interoperable network that works across multiple other layer ones, not just Ethereum, Solana, BNB, Cosmos, Polkadot. You can see that that there is a wide range of layer ones that they will be working with. And if we take a close look at the impact report, they say they have 1.2 million device owners right now, and by 2027 to climb up to 153 million device owners. Also, the number of economic transactions by 2024 is 142 million, and by 2027, that number is predicted to climb up to 9 billion transactions. So we could see that they are anticipating a lot of transactions in the upcoming years. And we just come right over here and take a look at the PEAQ's ecosystem as of March 2024. You can see a lot of dApps are being built on PEAQ. Also some notable names that they begin starting to work with, like MasterCard, like Bosch, like Airbus, Audi. These are some very recognizable names within the industry. And they're also integrated with Fetch AI as well, another one of these really cool AI blockchain projects. So a lot is happening within this PEAQ ecosystem. And if you take a look at PEAQ's website, you can see that there are 27 major dApps that are being built on it. It's only second to Ethereum in DePIN projects. And if you take a look at the enterprises, right, these are some of the companies that we talked about, Audi, Airbus, so they're integrating some of the largest companies within their networks as well. And then just some specific projects to mention. I thought ELOP was a very cool project. It's the largest ride-sharing Tesla collection project within Vienna, Austria. And they've been making a lot of grounds and a lot of traction. So if you take a look at their numbers, right, they're doing 100,000 plus customers, plus 200,000% in terms of revenue. So you could see that it is catching on. And then another practical project that I think works really well is YCrypt. It enables people like you and I to be able to share our Wi-Fi hotspot networks with others while earning tokens. And then finally, really cool, but PEAQ has been accepted into MasterCard's program to see how they can integrate and connect DePIN with traditional TradFi like credit card industry. So the PEAQ token is not live yet and you cannot trade it. But let's talk about the tokenomics and the recent public coinlist sale of the PEAQ token. So if we take a look right over here, you can see that there's 4.2 billion tokens of PEAQ. That's the maximum supply. And that 4.2 billion tokens is broken down as follows. So there's 41% right over here for community and ecosystem. That encompasses the launch pad. So this is the community sale. That was a public sale, which we're going to talk about. That's 6%. The community campaigns 15%, and then ecosystem and treasury 20%. So that makes up 41%. The funding for early backers, which is 12%, the private round is 22%, so that's 34%. The team gets about 20%, and then the security, so the network security is 5%. And if we just come right over here, look at the vesting details, it gives us a lot of information. So this is the public sale, that's 6% right over here. 15% of it is available on TGE. There's no lockup, but it's going to be vested over 6 months, so it's available over time. The community ecosystems, both of them, the campaigns and the treasury, notice that 35%, there's no lockup, but nothing is available. They're both vested over 3 years, 4 years, so that's a good release of slow scheduled release of the tokens. The fundings and early backers, this is really important to me. The early backers, the private round, the core team members, you can see they add up to a significant percentage. Now, the early backers, at TG, it's 5%. The funding private round, 7.5%, okay? There's a lockup of 6 months, and then after that, this is being released, the 5 and the other 7.5 right over here, over 24 months and over 18 months. So that's not too bad. They're locked in for a bit of time. Now, what's really important to me is the team, the core contributors, okay? And both of these right over here, we'll add them up as 20%. Nothing is available on day one, so they can't dump on us right away on day one. We want to make sure that the team is vested over the long term. There's a 9-month lockup period. There's no release after the lockup, but they're both vested over a 3-year time span, okay? And finally, the network security, as you can see, it's vested over 54 months. So when we take a look at the graph of the vesting and release schedule right over here, you can see for the first 7-8 months, it's pretty much stable, right? There's not a lot released at once, but as we go on into our, 12, 14, 16 month, and by 2-3 years, this is when it's very heavy inflationary pressure when more tokens become available over time. So over time, yes, there is an inflationary pressure, but at the beginning, you could see most tokens will be locked up or there'll be a slow release schedule during the first 6 months. So let's take a look at that CoinList public sale, those 6% that I talked about. It happened on March the 9th, right over here. 252 million for the 6%. They sold each one at a 0.079274. So about 8 cents, giving it an FDV of a rough value of 330 million. The purchase limits were actually pretty high. You could have purchased anywhere between $100 and 2.5 million. With the whale category having specific requirements, you can purchase in, but at a minimum of 50,000. Okay. USDC, USDT, so the stable coins, and like we said, 15% unlocked right away at token generation event, and then the rest is vested over 6 months. Unfortunately, like most of you, I could not participate living in Canada and the US. You cannot participate, so those countries are out. And then in terms of the token allocation, you could see right over here, the way they allocated was 5.5% to CoinList users and PEAQ community members, and then a 0.5%. They don't want all the whales having it and then dumping it right away. So that was their allocation. We talked about the minimums right over here for each category, okay? The different types of criteria and then what you have to commit. So that was the public sale. It went on for 8 cents, okay? 8 cents at a $333 million FDV. So remember that valuation. So before we get to the charts and a price prediction, remember that the DePIN space is very competitive. It is wild with a lot of projects out there competing for attention. So you want to keep this in mind and you want to benchmark yourself and how you think about the PEAQ token performing. And if we just go back to the Masari report, they talk about a lot of competition, specifically with Solana. Now here's my take on Solana and things like ETH is that they're not focused on DePIN, right? It's an all-around blockchain. Like Solana is great, but it has a lot of problems because it still has a lot of outages, and then it's also dealing with NFTs and DeFi and everything else under the sun. And then Ethereum is much too slow and way too expensive to run DePIN projects on. So that leaves you with these DePIN specific layer ones like IOTEX and PEAQ. So even though the PEAQ token is not live yet, we can gauge its closest competitor, and I think the project that looks most like it is IOTEX. So if you take a look at IOTEX right over here, it's at 478 million right now. It's traded pretty well in the year. It's ran up really hard. At one point it was at, close to 8-9 cents. So it was almost double. It's got a pullback like everything else within the market. If you just switch over to market cap right over here, at one point it touched 800 million, almost a billion in terms of market cap. So it can run to a billion very, very quickly with these projects. Now, I won't go into the specific of IOTEX, right? Its low is right here, all-time high. It's actually 26 cents. So if we go all the way back, you can see that in the 2021 bull run right over here, it's touched 2.3 billion. So it's ran up really hard, 26 cents from here, so roughly 5x. And then at its lowest, of course, nobody ever gets in at these prices, but it gives us a gauge to see where we can expect the PEAQ token to be. Now, as a project, I do believe that PEAQ is a much better project than IOTEX. So I'm just going to switch this back to price, take a look at the performance throughout the year. Because DePIN and AI and everything else is a current narrative right now, I do think that projects in these areas would do well. Now, remember the value in terms of the tokenomics. So the PEAQ token is coming out at 8 cents with an FDV of 333 million. I do think that it will do better than IOTEX, so I think it's going to blow the 400 million line pretty easily because the project is so much more developed and robust versus IOTEX. Now, in the long term, I do think that PEAQ will be a multi-billion-dollar project if executed properly. As a rule of thumb, I do not buy on the first day out because that token can dump. You never know, it could swing up. But I always take a look at really good projects. And for those of you who've been following me along this channel, I wait until an opportunity to get in. Just like this recent pullback, I was able to get into many of my favorite projects. I talked about them, when Bitcoin dropped to 56, 57,000, and that was my chance to get in when I saw things pulled back 50, 60, and in some cases 70%. So my thoughts are, in terms of PEAQ, it's a great token, great project. If they can execute it properly, this is likely a multi-billion-dollar project, but look out for a good entry. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video. I hope that you get some value out of this video and learn something about the PEAQ network. So if you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing, and I will see you next time.